Hey guys, it's Alex. A little while back, I did a video giving a general overview of 3 tools that you can use to get better sounding dialogue. And today I want to talk specifically about one of those tools and give you a little bit of a deeper dive into compressors. Compressors are used to tighten up the levels across a recording so that they're a little bit more consistent within each other instead of being all over the place. And they do that by addressing what's called the dynamic range, which is kind of like the contrast in between the loudest and the quietest parts of any of your source material. You can kind of think of them as automatic volume controls. With your recordings, you set a level that you say, hey, anything below this is pretty much fine and anything above this is treated as loud. And the compressor will look at all the loud stuff and say, oh, I'll reduce that by a given amount and I'll leave all the quiet stuff alone. Word of caution before we get started, compressors are one of the tools that are kind of the easiest to go too far with, and you can make things sound really bad really quickly. But if you use them in the right way, you're going to get a lot more consistent levels and they're going to sound more pleasing to your ears. Now, I'm loading up a compressor from FabFilter called Pro C, and I like FabFilter's stuff not only because it sounds good to me, but also because it's really easy to see what I'm doing, and visually, you can take any of the things that I'm talking about and translate them to any compressor that you're using. So looking at Pro C's interface, there are really only 5 major parameters that I want to be focusing on that'll translate to every compressor that you're going to use, whether it's in Pro Tools or Avid or Premiere, Final Cut or Audacity or DaVinci, whatever you've got, every compressor will have these things. First parameter is the threshold. That is the imaginary line that you set in your recordings, depending on what you've got, that says anything above this line, anything above this level, consider that loud, and anything below this level, consider that to be quiet and leave it alone. The next parameter is ratio. When you're talking about those things above that threshold, the ratio says, hey, this loud stuff, I want you to reduce that by a factor, and the ratio is that factor. So if you've got a ratio of 2, that's dividing by half. If you've got a ratio of 3, it's dividing by 3. If you've got a ratio of 10, it's dividing by 10. You get the idea. Next parameter is attack. Attack determines how fast the compressor responds when a sound crosses that threshold that you've set. So it's really great if you want to soften consonants or you've got really big harsh transients that you want to kind of tuck down and make sound more smooth. Having a fast attack, the compressor will see that immediately and clamp down. If you have a slow attack, it allows it to kind of punch through a little bit. So if you have drums, for example, that you want to cut through, a slower attack on those drums will allow them to cut through your mix. Similarly, again, if you've got consonants in your voice that you want to cut through music or backgrounds, leave the compressor's attack a little bit slower and it'll do so. The next parameter is release. Same idea with attack. If you have a fast release, it lets go of things as soon as they cross that imaginary threshold line really quickly. A slower release, it'll kind of gradually let go and can typically sound a little bit more natural depending on what your recordings have. And the last parameter is makeup gain. A compressor, by the nature of the way it works, it will reduce the overall level of your sounds. It's making those big loud sounds above that threshold match more quiet sounds below the threshold. So after you've compressed, you need to bring that level back up using makeup gain to retain the same level of energy that you've had. So let's start working with this. If you look at the levels of my voice on my meters, they're already pretty consistent because I'm trying to project pretty evenly and not speak too loud and not speak too quiet. But there's still some dynamic range in there that I can tighten up. The first thing I'm going to adjust is my threshold. Again, where is that dividing line between where I think loud and where I think quiet sounds live? So I'll find a spot that it's only going to work on the loudest parts of my voice to dial those back down a little bit. Next is ratio. For the voice specifically, a ratio of more than about 3 starts sounding unnatural pretty quickly, and I don't want my peak levels to be reduced by a huge amount because it gets real weird fast. So I'm going to set that to 3. Now, I personally want the transients and the consonants that I'm saying to kind of cut through a little bit more, so I'm going to use a slow attack, and that way the compressor won't really work very hard on those if it touches them at all. Same thing with the release. I'm going to leave it a little bit slower so that it's not doing this weird pumping thing where it'll clamp down really fast and unclamp really fast. It just sounds a little bit more natural to my ears. And you can hear once I've got these settings dialed in, if I play with my threshold and lower that a whole bunch, my voice gets really squashed or really doesn't have anything done to it at all. So you can adjust these parameters individually as you go to dial in the right sound. Once I've got something that I like where everything sounds consistent enough for me, I'm going to use the makeup gain to bring my audio levels back up and retain that same energy that I had before I started compressing, and that way you get the most smooth, natural sound across the board. And again, FabFilter makes it really easy to see what the compressor that I'm using is doing, but you can apply this technique to every compressor out there, whether you're using another non-linear editor than the video world, or you're using another audio program, maybe Reaper or Logic or Ableton, and all the same stuff will apply. And one last workflow tip it's sort of more of an order of operations thing. I did another video on EQ using an equalizer to kind of shape the sound that you've got. You can use a compressor after an EQ if you know how your compressor is going to respond to your sound, and that way you don't have to do a whole bunch of different steps to kind of get your audio into the right spot. You can EQ it first, get out all the frequencies you don't need, sweeten the ones that you do like, and then compress to tighten up the dynamics of your now treated sound. Sometimes you can use an EQ before and after a compressor, depending on what you want to do, but to save time, get to know the sounds of your plugins really well, and you can use that workflow, again, EQ into compressor, and that'll get you a little bit more slimmed down in terms of tools that you have to rely on. And that's about it. Compressors are not particularly complicated tools, and by understanding their parameters and the order of operations you can use them in, you'll get a lot better sound and a lot more professional sounding projects really fast. This is the same workflow that anybody on a major feature film or TV dub stage would use, just like anybody in a music studio would use. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, come follow me over on Instagram at AXK, and thanks for watching.